Okay, we're back. This is part two in this series, uh, Habits of Highly Effective Impressionists. And as I said, I had a student who was struggling, and I saw that his thinking, he hadn't built these points into habits, these ideas. He had these ideas understood in his head, but he hadn't turned them into working habits, or what we call disciplines. I have found that once I saw something needed to be incorporated, once I saw that a way of thinking had to be incorporated, for example, one of the things for me was to be relational at all times as it pertained to angles. And I've mentioned it probably to you before because it was a very particular moment where I said, all right, so how are you going to do angles and do them well every time? Because I find myself just totally erratic with angles, finding angles off that I hadn't even noticed had been off for a very long time. And so I began to realize that at that point I said, because I already learned a system, I said to myself, all right, Paul, so you are going to do angles to vertical no matter what you're drawing for the next half hour. So I wasn't trying to turn myself into a little thing where I go happily along and do some exercise. I said, from this point forward, you're going to do this brief exercise. It's a half-hour exercise, and everything you do, no matter what you work on, even if it's just the colors, you're going to see what the colors when you're trying to see what the color relates to, you're going to relate it to some other color, and you're going to notice even what the angle is. And you're going to say, and how does that angle feel to vertical? And I did that, and I found that I could incorporate. I never didn't do that again after that. If I just did that for about 20 minutes, if I stayed consistent, it was hard to do. It was hard to make me do that every time, especially when you talk about colors. The last thing you wanted to do is do an angle. You're not thinking angles. But you can say that, okay, what colors am I talking about? Let's get the angle right first. And I was just building it in as an idea. Let's do angles to vertical. Well, that's in the class of relational thinking, right? And I found that you don't have to just struggle with these things and wish you could do that. When you find that you're deficient, you're not inconsistent in thinking relationally, which I'm going to go into here, you need to get that way. These need to be your lifestyle, your mentality, right? That's a mind, right? Let that mind be in you. All right, so that's the relational thinking. So everything we're doing is establishing context. That's all relational thinking means. It means when you set the dark is dark and the light is light. That's a first piece of relational thinking. Well, every single thing you do has to be done, has to be right if you understand an impression, has to be right to all the other things in the picture in every way. It has to be right in value to the other things in the picture. It has to be right in location to the other things in the picture. It has to be right in intensity. It has to be right in hue. And any shape that's being made has to be right in shape and its relationship to all the other parts of the painting, right? It turns this into what looks like a really hard job. The problem is it's an easier job because we're not thinking about anatomy and 400 other things. We're actually reducing the number of things we would otherwise be thinking about. You guys who are working with other ideas are adding to your burden, not reducing it. And you won't get as good results in my view. I didn't get as good results when I started reducing things down. Let's just talk about what we see. I'm just talking about, by the way, training your eye to see. Gamel once defined, I think this was in the Twilight of Painting as well, R.H. Ives Gamel, my early mentor, he defined seeing as seeing relationally. And that's the old standard. He didn't make that up. That's the old standard. Seeing is seeing relationally. So establishing context is all you're doing. And so Brackman, the impressionist I worked with, used the expression, he said, it's just this to this and that to that, and had a cigarette hanging out his mouth. I've told you that story before. But you have to be relational at all times. If you're not, you're in bad habits, okay? You're not in the good habits. The habits you need are to be relational at all times. Seeing and establishing relationships of unconnected floating elements is a skill, right? You have to be able to say, if you have a color red over here and you have some other color, even the color of my face up here, you have to be able to see this without me bringing it over side by side with it, or even using the card method. You'll have to, which is not a wise thing to be doing. But you have to be able to see what this color node is to that one. You have to be able to adjust them until they're right to each other. But that's a different discussion. But the floating a line. So then Paxton talks about floating a line. So if you're trying to do a drawing of any kind, you'll be putting down some lines. You'll be establishing a top and a bottom if you have any wisdom, right? Those are floating points. But they're pieces of, if you do it the way I do it, you make it as a shape. There's a shape down here, and then you say, and you float them, and you say, how are they doing? and you don't just go forward. You look at them immediately and correct them. These are all the mindset of an impressionist. But you have to be able to say, how do they float? And you'll see that the angle's wrong. They're floating at the wrong angle to each other. But the idea of floating is just one of the many skills you have to have, and to be able to see the relationships of things that aren't in touch with each other. You're not just crawling on to the next thing and gluing it on to the next, but everything that exists in nature is going to have a functional relationship to all the other points, everything you do. As I said, in color and shape and location and et cetera, edge quality, light effect, value, contrast, all those things. So, but these value contrasts, for example, just the effects in the room right here, the bright things that are floating in relation to each other, your job is actually going to be to get them independently of any other knowledge. What else would there be, by the way? So that's a very obvious and very underrated, understood skill. The third one is establishing truth only by multiple comparisons and in context with the whole. Now, that's in defiance of everything card and everything sight size. You really have to you have to see this color note. By seeing it, you have to see its relative redness to something. You have to see its relative, just a hue, red, yellow, blueness. You have to see its value to all sorts of things in the picture. And the more things you relate this to, even to understand its hue, the more things you relate it to, the more you can't be wrong. And that's our rectifying strategy, right? That's how we get to certainty, right? And that's classic, I shouldn't say classic, but it's well-developed cognitive thinking. It's a fundamental skill, multiple comparisons, and of course, comparisons with the whole, and in the context of the whole. So you see it? So it's this to this and that to that. So it's effect to effect, it's value to value, and it's value to value to value to value. And it's what value is it while you're looking at the whole, right? So do that over and over with color and everything, okay? So if I'm saying those things to you here, do you follow the idea of relational? When I'm doing the yellows, when I'm doing these yellows here, these yellows are a function of these yellows, right? Or even the hand here, which you see lands between this yellow and that red. These color relations have to be such and such. But the location of this thing to this, to this, to this, all these things are real locations. I'm just talking about these dark spots here. These are real locations in relation to each other. You know, this. And by the way, there's that geometry thing. You can describe this thing here as an interesting shape, right? And whatever interesting shapes you see in nature, you have to have that quality if you're making a true statement of what's in front of you. But so the this to this and that to that, and then always the context is this to this, and then it's to the whole, the context in the whole as well. So the fact of what color this is and the fact of what color this is, it doesn't mean anything to an impressionist. Impressionists are concerned about what they do as an ensemble of color notes and what their impact is on the eye. And you're going to find more delight in that when you learn how to play it and not make messes, which you will do. Which you will learn. Which will come to you. So that was the end of that one. I'm not going to do any more with that now. And let's see if I've overlooked something I should repeat here with that picture in front of me. Multiple comparisons. Let's do the floating conversation here with that picture in mind, right? So you can see that these blues out here are not connected to these blues, which are not connected to these blues, or the blues in the clothes. But they all have to be right to each other. So that's what I mean by floating ones. If you talk about effects, you talk about something like this that has contrast and edge. Well, then that one has to be right to one that's over here that's similar to it, or to this one down here that you might say is in the same class. Or if as a curve, you have to be able to float this one and see how it feels to this one, which changes directions. It changes it has a down and a back over, almost like an S curve. You have to be able to see those things and correct them floating in space. You don't have to redraw the hat. You don't want to be doing that. It's very impractical, okay? So this idea of putting down a note and leaving it is another one of the mindsets, but it's not, this is a simple different point. But the value is the lightest light and darkest dark. Here you see a lightest light, and when you're painting anything, if you think that's your lightest light, no matter what light you're painting out here, you never let it get past that one, okay? And then you say, but in the context of the whole, what are the lights? So this one, things we might think of as the lights, but there's for the area they're in, they are the brightest spots. And one of them will be slightly darker than the other one. One of them, the effect will be slightly stronger. All those things have to be right to all the other guys in their family. So I hope you understand that, the simplicity of that. This is not complicated stuff. And now, let's call it a day. We've done that one in, 10 minutes. And Mr. Producer wants us to do these things in one idea at a time groups. So that's the idea of relationships. This whole thing, if you don't understand this, nothing goes right for you. Painting is a relational problem. It's not a factual problem, and it's not an actual problem. We said in the very beginning, we paint visual phenomena. The retina is hit, and all it has is color value and all that stuff to work with, right? When you get to this part of it, we're talking about painting, not the actual. Obviously that's what we're doing. We set that up. And now we're not painting the factual. We don't care what anything is. We care what it does in relation to everything else. And so the relationships are the thing, okay? Are you thinking that way when you lay something in? Now, one of the things I found, even in myself, when I was doing this as a student, would say with Bregman, I was just hitting notes and trying to get them right in the world. I had no idea where it was going to take me. It was just like this big funny thing of waiting and waiting and waiting. And I've said that to you, to see what the results are by finally you get all these colors together, right? Well, Bregman would have you do some sort of a little drawing thing there, but I have not found that that's the wisdom for this way of working. But I've said that same thing about waiting and waiting and waiting, and with Gamel's method. Gamel's way of drawing was of making a portrait, for example. I kept thinking, I'm 30 days into this thing, and I still can't tell if it's going to be a good portrait. In other words, I hadn't set up enough data to actually see whether I even had a good composition. Now that goes completely against Boston School thinking. That is to say, and you could have said it was just in me. It wasn't anything about Gamel. That's understandable. There's a young student. But if you understand that idea, though, you will learn in this process to see the color scheme, the floating stuff, the stuff floating around. You'll be able to see the beauty of the color scheme before it ever becomes drawing. And you need to get those points of reward, shall we say, out of the relationships. Don't just be monotonous and say, I see this is this to this, and this is this to this. Look for the panel to start showing you, and this is going to come up later, but I want to leave you with this thought here. Be patient in this moment, right? And we do hit color notes first. This is our model, but be patient in this phase, right? And not knowing that it's come together, but be patient and put down notes, put down another note, put down some other, maybe make them just grow a little bit bigger so you can begin. And then you start seeing the field, and you start seeing the color scheme, and there's certainty, right? You don't have to wait the rest of your life. You saw it to refine it, you're still going to have to do some drawing. And that's at the point you're going to bring the top of this hat here over, you're going to bring the light to that hat, and you're going to actually see if you can produce that quality of effect. And then you'll have a whole world of effects. Before that, you just had the world of darkest dark to lightest light, and all the values in between, the most chromatic notes, whatever they were, to the all the way down to the least, intense notes, wherever they are. These are ranges of things we're just floating out there in the world, but you will be able to see your color scheme, so that's one of those things I'm trying to get you to do and accept. But don't be too impatient with this phase, right? Just be thinking, no matter what you're doing, is when I'm working on color, I'm being relational, right? When I'm working on values, I'm being relational. There's many more things, these other aspects of this, and I'm tending to jump into them. I don't want to do that. Okay, so that's the relational aspect, the relational discipline, the relational mindset. And seeing is seeing relationally. So teach yourself to see relationally, okay? All right. Now, I could leave you this one last thought about Degas, and I've mentioned these before. These aren't going to be new ideas to you, but when Degas he said he was looking at a guy named Humbert. He was teaching somebody. He was looking at this guy with his student, and he said he's got his student side by side. He's got his canvas side by side with what he's painting, and Degas' comment was one of almost shock. He said, "What is this guy doing? Doesn't he know it's an art of relations?" I'll just leave you with that idea, though. He expressly says it's an art of relations. So that's why this is so important. Do you have the mindset of the relational? Okay. All right. And so thank you for all your kind comments and all your subscriptions, your sharing, and donations. Everything that's led up to this. I really do appreciate that up to this point. And this has really been a wonderful run for me. And I'm hoping it's just as much for you and will pay off for you. All right. So we'll see you in the next one in this series. All right. Take care.